So my talk is called Sexual Violence and Radical Feminine Collective Healing. I don't know what those words are in Spanish, but to me, radical, feminine, and collective and healing mean a lot. And so that's why I chose to call it this. Exactly 10 years ago, in September 2015, I was standing on a similar stage in California at a TEDx platform. And it was for the first time that I shared on that platform publicly that I was sexually abused, I was beaten, and that also publicly. And as I said those words, you know, it's not easy to talk about your abuse publicly. As I said those words, I felt myself shaking. Today I have the podium. At the TEDx, I didn't have the podium. I was standing in the middle of the stage, shaking while talking about my abuse. And why was that? I think for too long I had not spoken about my abuse, and it was the first time that I was sharing about it on stage. I had associated shame and guilt with my experience for far too long, and bit by bit that shame started to suffocate me, and I decided that I had to get on my healing journey. And so I decided to start my healing journey on stage publicly. Now, you may ask, why would somebody do that on stage? You see, even though it's public, the stage has a comfort space. You know, the people, the audience, unless you engage with them, they don't talk back at you. Sometimes the light is such that you can't even see the faces of the audience. So you don't get judged. And so the stage felt a very safe space for me to start. The video of that talk obviously captured my nervousness. It went viral. It got close to about 100,000 views. And you could see me shifting from side to side. You could see me fidgeting with my hair. You could see me smacking my lips. And these mannerisms were not usual to me. Like I said, I was a television anchor. So at the time when I did that talk, I used to do the morning daily news. So public speaking was not something I feared. But standing there talking about my abuse, being vulnerable to everybody, was a totally different ballgame. I felt completely naked, completely open to being judged, shamed, and ridiculed. And that I was. There were about 300 odd comments on that TED Talk. And can you guess what those comments were about? Any guesses? I'm opening it up to the audience. Any idea what those 300 comments on my talk were? Yeah? Anybody else? Exactly. The 300 comments on that were abusive. They were victim shaming. Somebody called me a feminazi. They commented on my looks. They commented on my face. They commented on my mannerisms. Somebody said, if she smacks her lips again, I'm going to smack her face. The others said, what was a teenager doing at a hotel lobby? She obviously had to be abused. So, you know, I desperately didn't want to be looking at those comments, but I found myself going back to it again and again and doom scrolling through them. We know what doom scrolling is today, don't we? So I constantly found myself doom scrolling those comments, hoping that someone would actually see me. And why was I actually giving that talk? Some people did. Not all those comments are negative. Some odd comments, you know, are positive, trying to support me. The talk got picked up by the Indian media, and a lot of people started calling me as an expert on gender-based violence and an expert on sexual violence. You know, if you have been abused, doesn't mean you're an expert. But it so happens that when you start talking about it, I started being called to these platforms to speak on sexual violence and gender-based violence. A lot of women also wrote to me privately saying that I inspired them and that my experience and my talking about them had inspired them. You know, at some point, that became a little difficult for me, because the truth is, I didn't feel empowered. I didn't even feel that I was inspiring to others. I was crumbling inside, because the way my abuse was becoming my identity, I wasn't prepared for it. I wasn't ready to own it. And I really felt unsure of how to navigate through it all. And so what happened to me was the re-triggering of all those memories and the doom scrolling, which led to PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and trauma. And I started waking up in the middle of the nights with my bed sheet totally soaked with sweat, my t-shirt soaked with sweat, thirsty. And so my bedtime routine started looking a bit like gym routine. I would sleep with towels on my side, with an extra t-shirt, with bottles of water, so that in the middle of the night when I would wake up, I would wipe my body, wipe off the sweat, change the bed sheet, change into another t-shirt. So what was really happening to me and my body? I'm going to quote from one of my favorite books written by a well-known psychiatrist, Bessel A. van der Kolk. It says, "We have learned that trauma is not just an event that took place sometime in the past. It is also the imprint left by that experience on mind, brain, and body. This imprint has ongoing consequences for how the human organism manages to survive in the present. Your trauma from the past, or the episodes of violence that ended for me, but the trauma in my body and my brain came alive every time a situation was there, which re-triggered it and made me act in ways which were, as though I was in urgency." I also happened to have a lot of runs to the emergency, to the ER, where I would feel like I'm having a heart attack. And so I would run and say, "Please get my ECG done or my EKG done, check for blood clots." I even got an MRI done, and everything came back normal. It was amply clear that episodes of violence were over, but the memory of it was stored in my body and brain, and at the slightest trigger, it started reliving and reacting to it. So obviously I was exhausted by all of this, and I wanted to be free from it. But freedom, as you know, if you're a woman, and especially a woman in a brown body, doesn't come easy. Navigating through a world of men who decide for you, who tell you every day what is right, what is wrong, how you need to live, what you need to wear, what your body is when you need to birth, is triggering. And so for me, every day felt like a trigger. Though a small window of opportunity, or what I call my liberation, opened up for me. This was about a few weeks after the talk. There was mass migration happening in 2015, if you all remember, from Syria and from the Middle East into Eastern Europe. So as a journalist then, I packed my bags, I took a camera, and went to the borders in Eastern European countries, Croatia, Serbia. And I was naturally drawn towards the stories of women, or women on the move. What I saw was women, refugees, not just trying to escape violence and persecution, but also caring for their children, caring for other elderly women. And the stories they had were not of the violence and persecution that they had just escaped, but the violence and persecution they had experienced along the way, the violence and persecution they were experiencing even at that spot where they were. It was not ending for them. The men may have left the violence and the persecution and the discrimination from whichever country they were fleeing, but for the women, they carried it with them, and they were living it, reliving it day by day. It was at that point that I started the healing circles, healing story circles for women refugees. The first such circle was held informally in Athens in 2018, just with one word in mind, which is azadi, which means freedom in Hindi, Urdu, and Persian. I didn't know what would come out of these circles, but the only thing, the only emotion, the only sentiment I had in mind was freedom, azadi. 8 women refugees from Afghanistan, Iraq, Iran, Palestine, Syria came together for a week to share in what they built together, a safe space. As they shared their stories with each other, as they held each other with their words and in their arms, they cried, they laughed. Through their stories, I felt seen, and through their words, I felt heard. And in that space that we built together, there was collective healing. It became a space of collective feminine energy and collective feminine conscience. And that safe space in itself became a small step, but a radical step towards dismantling patriarchy. And to me, my mission became more clear than ever. The Azadi Project was registered as a nonprofit organization. I left my job as a TV journalist and subsequently left my job at the World Bank to create radical feminine healing spaces. So what have the 5 years, including the 2 years of pandemic, looked like? It has meant coming together of displaced, marginalized women, survivors of violence in India, Bangladesh, Greece, Ukraine, Poland. 8,000 women across the world have started the healing journey by harnessing sisterhood and collective energy. 500 plus sessions have been co-created by them. Please know that they co-create these sessions. We don't create these sessions for them. So what do these numbers mean? 8,500. Do these numbers mean anything? To me, numbers mean nothing. The numbers mean nothing without faces or without the stories of the women behind them. So here's Minara's story. Minara, who's a refugee from Myanmar. She's a mother who suffers from acute mental health issues and dissociative disorder. The violence she saw and endured personally paralyzes her every day, and she deals with seizures, fainting, and dissociation. But at Azadi, she says, her healing journey began, and not only does she have access to therapy now, she's also earning a livelihood and advocating for other women refugees. Nargis, a refugee from Iran. Nargis suffered multiple sexual violence attacks on her along the route while trying to flee and coming to Greece. She was also imprisoned in Turkey. She started her healing journey, or her Azadi journey, in Lesbos in Greece. Today she's teaching, translating, and living a free life in Spain. Biba's story, a migrant in Niger, a migrant woman who had never been to school and was enslaved in Libya. She escaped and started her journey with Azadi, learning crucial livelihood skills like community radio and broadcasting her own show. Collectively, 50 women together are earning an income by learning and being involved in livelihood programs at our Women's Center in New Delhi. Together, they started their journey of financial independence. But in all their stories, there's my story as well. You know, how can I leave that out? 10 years ago, when I stood on that stage with which I started this talk, I was still a victim. I had not healed. I had no concept of what agency of my body meant, because for far too long, I, like most of you and most women, was told, touched, and prodded in ways that felt like my body was not mine. For far too long, the decision makers, mostly men, have decided for our bodies. Our decisions to birth, on how we decide to birth, or how not to birth. But the women I worked with and created healing spaces for, unbeknownst to them, healed me. And so in 2020, 5 years after the 2015 talk, when I got pregnant in the middle of the pandemic, and the government of the country where I lived told me that I could not vaccinate myself and could not protect my body and my baby's body, my unborn baby's body, I wasn't going to let them decide for me, my body or my baby. I started a campaign demanding the government to open vaccinations for pregnant women in India, 25 million pregnant women at one point in India, many of whom were dying of COVID because hospitals would not treat them, considering them high risks, and government would not vaccinate them. 75,000 people and more signed in support of the petition, and we filed a plea in the Delhi High Court. 2 days after the birth of my son, the government opened up vaccinations for pregnant women in India. 25 million pregnant women in India who were denied the right to vaccinate and to protect them, their bodies, and their babies had collectively won. Could I have done that in 2015? The answer is no. Collective feminine healing is radical. It is political. It is activism. It breaks the systemic shackles of patriarchy, sexism, and oppression. So never mistake women coming together in safe spaces, in circles, in forums like this, as women business. What comes out of this space is transformative. For me, life has come full circle in many ways. From being a women's rights activist, I'm now the mother to a beautiful little boy. A boy who was born to the activism of his mother and to the activism of other women in India. A boy who has taught me that the true meaning of healing and true equity is not possible if I don't count him in. Thanks to my son Veera and his questions about life, and his confusion to statements like, boys don't cry, be a man, don't be a wuss, like blue, don't like pink. Azadi has now launched a project that addresses toxic masculinity and gender equity in schools in India. Because no little boy or man is born a sexist, and no little girl or woman should ever be told that she deserves less. I had decided to end my talk here. But last night, I decided to add something extra. You see, this talk is very special to me in more ways than one, and you may ask why. Ever since I was 6 or 7, my mother taught me how to speak my mind fearlessly. She also taught me how to do that on stage. She trained me, she wrote my scripts, she rehearsed line by line with me multiple times, making me win every school debate competition, and eventually leading me to speak on global platforms like this. Today's talk, this talk, is the last talk that my mother and I spoke about. Last night, my mother passed away battling cancer at a hospital in India. I was with her 10 days ago, and she was so happy I was coming here. She said, I'm so proud of you. She wanted for me to be here amongst all of you and to tell you about the women in India, our struggles, and our wins against all odds. Like most women in India, I too am the product, or not just in India, like most women here, I too am the product of the love, struggles, and sacrifice of my mother. And today I take her name proudly, Dipti Sur. She was a teacher, a professor, a feminist, a mom, a sister, a wife, and a loving grandmother. If it wasn't for our mothers, our grandmothers, and the generations of strong, resilient women who stand behind us, you and I wouldn't be here. They are the foundation on what we stand. They are the wind beneath our wings. Without them, there would be no women working for the world. This talk is a tribute to my mother and to every mom who has raised strong daughters. Can you please repeat after me? May we know them. May we raise them. May we be them. And may we say their name. My mother's name is Dipti Biswas Sur, and I'm honored to be her daughter, and it's a privilege to share this space with you today. Namaste.
Sabemos que